What really wants to be expressed in this hour or so I have with you. I'd like to invite us to explore a metaphor as we sit here, because as the mayor and I just exchanged, it's one thing to have the value of compassion in your life. It's another thing to embody it and to actualize it as a city, as multiple communities, as an educational system, as a medical system, as a family system, which each of us comes from, and also as individuals. And that metaphor can be reflected literally in the quality that we cultivate as we take an in-breath and out-breath as we let go into what is really going on in our world. And it in part is expressed by this intention to cultivate deep stability, real sense of groundedness with our feet flat on the earth. And that mental stability allows us to perceive suffering clearly, also to perceive capacity and strength clearly. And I think Merton endeavored to cultivate that stability in part by stepping away from the stream of the complex sense world of a certain kind, but also of relating to the earth, you know, in almost the similar way of really regarding the earth as Wendell Berry does and Tanya Berry. Another physical metaphor that is very important is the back, just as our feet connect with the floor right now, carrying that sense of groundedness. Our strong back exemplifies the mental quality of compassion that is essentialized by equanimity. And our front, the front part of our body, exemplifies this tenderness to the world, our openness toward the world. And we can practice with this metaphor, strong back, soft front, because we do need equanimity to uphold ourselves in the midst of so many complex conditions, to care for all beings equally, and at the same time to be open to the world as it is. So I'd like to say a few things about the Gethsemane, if you will, of my own life. I was born during the Second World War. I'm 72. My father was in the war, in the Mediterranean theater, and my roots are from the South. And I am what you would call, or what was called, a war baby. I think there's more than one war baby in this room. A couple of generations later, there were peace babies, right? But I was definitely in the generation of what was called the war baby generation. And when I was 4, I awakened, and I couldn't see. And I was blind for 2 years and partially paralyzed from a very serious illness. And through that experience, discovered I had an internal life. And it's interesting, you know, to be in my 70s and to be able to look back. I actually remember waking up and not being able to see, and feeling along the wall into my parents' room and telling them I couldn't see. And then my health degenerated seriously from there. And a woman was hired to help my mother and father take care of me, who was an incredible woman. Her mother had been a slave. And she had some quality about her which I've encountered in few other individuals, which was this sort of basic goodness, this kind of joy, this natural altruism, this quality of courage and also resilience. She was pliable like a stalk of bamboo. And she really communicated to the doctors, my parents, even though she came from a part of town that was very oppressed and depressed. She communicated with incredible dignity and humor and also wisdom. And fortunately, I came out of this siege. I came out of it with a sense, I remember kind of getting more mobilized around the age of 6, discovering, as I think about it in my older years, that I had an interior life. So much of our interior life has now been allocated to our technology, interestingly enough. Our kids are on their screens. I'm on my screen too, by the way. I'm not saying technology is not important for us. We don't know about what happens in a world where we've allocated our memory to our handheld device or even our wrist-wearing device. We don't know what happens when affectively we've divorced ourselves from warm hand to warm hand relationality and allocated our relationship to technology only. And I appreciate technology also for keeping many relationships alive in my life and extending the reach of my relationship. But as I look back at my childhood, the profound value of this experience of catastrophe that I went through as a child, also the blessing of the care of my family and those they brought in to care for me, changed my values. It opened me, that journey into sickness, opened me to something that is about the miracle of our humanity. The extraordinary capacity that every individual has to bring goodness into this world. There's a guy walking along the beach. He sees another guy over there. He's hip deep in starfish. And he's pitching one starfish at a time back into the water. And the first guy walks up to him and says, you know, a lot of starfish. I mean, you know, what difference is it going to make? And the man picked up the next starfish, pitched it into the water. He said, it's going to make a difference for that one. It's going to make a difference for that one. I had this feeling, as did many of us in the 1960s, that we had social responsibility among other responsibilities. It was really important for us to move into our world with justice present, but also compassion present. Justice is one thing, but justice without compassion is not enough. And it was really during this time of great inner turmoil that I had the good fortune to hear Thomas Merton's name. to read D.T. Suzuki and to also read Krishnamurti, and reminding myself of a book called The Only Revolution, and we were big social change agents in the 1960s. It was that sense that Krishnamurti said, which really caught my attention: the only revolution is the revolution within. Because it's from that base and our capacity to work together collaboratively that we can foment, that we can cultivate, bring about social change, which impacts our environment, which impacts our economic system, which impacts our health system, impacts our school, and so forth. But our society, I was saying to the mayor, in terms of Louisville as a city of compassion and how we introduce compassion into our educational system, with our technology, with all of the junk that goes into the mind of not only kids, but of their families and of everybody, how do we actually foster compassion? How do we cultivate compassion? Since the programs that I was familiar with in various medical settings, which were directed toward training clinicians in compassion, were very behaviorally oriented and did not really cultivate compassion as an internal state. I couldn't go into medical systems also with a particular religious identity, that what would float and be most effective was teaching from a base of social psychology and brain science. So I want to say this to you: turn your kids on in your educational system to brain science. Kids love science, and it has had a profound impact in various fields, including in the field of education, the work that Tish Jennings is doing, also in certain aspects of medicine, how our God is science. How interesting it is to see the insights of contemplatives from 2,500 years being validated in the context of science. And it was in this situation at the Library of Congress that I began to develop a heuristic map of compassion. I had seen how difficult it was for not only clinicians but educators, and not only educators but parents, to actually drop down into what compassion is. And so what happened for me was very simple. I began to pull from the threads of my life as a long-time contemplative, pull from neuroscience, social psychology, pull from my experience with people who are dying, and also pull from my experience with clinicians, and look at what will really serve here, but also more deeply, what is compassion composed of? And I saw, as I began to question myself, that I needed to ask myself some questions in this exploration if I was going to understand it. And the first question was, is compassion possible? Is it possible without attentional balance, without being grounded, without being able to perceive things vividly and clearly? And I realized, no, compassion really wasn't possible without having a quality of attention that was steady and that was clear, that was inclusive, that was non-judgmental. I asked myself the second question: is compassion possible without having these qualities of affect that are basically pro-social? away from our cynicism, away from anger, that are based on love, as you touched into this morning, that are based on kindness. Can compassion be actualized if you're a person who has, for example, a lot of aversion? And I know from the work in social psychology and neuroscience that affect biases attention. And when I looked really deeply, I realized, no, compassion is not possible without a good heart being present, these pro-social qualities. And in this regard, what we've seen in neuroscience and social psychology is that these pro-social states of mind and heart can be intentionally cultivated, which is just fascinating. It's not that we have to just sit in our skepticism, our sense of alienation. We can actually change our neural networks through our intention. So this is really important for our kids, because so much stuff conditions us externally. How do we help children to actually cultivate greater kindness, greater flourishing, and intend to do so, and also discover that the outcomes in terms of how they feel physically are positive? And then I asked myself, is compassion possible without an intention that is fundamentally altruistic and that's based in deep ethical values? And I had to say no again. In other words, we can behave in pro-social ways, but those pro-social ways are at times very self-directed. It's called selfish pro-social behavior in social psychology. It's fascinating. How do we create the conditions to cultivate the values associated with pro-sociality, the value of kindness in the world? At some level, as we are in an experience of compassion, we're in this state of emotional attunement. We're feeling into the situation of others. And yet, if that resonance, if that empathy is not regulated in some way, either spontaneously or because we're being overwhelmed by feeling too much and moving into personal distress, compassion is not accessible. And often the way that we enter into this experience of regulation, interestingly enough, is to realize at some level we're all connected, and Merton saw that so clearly. His words reflected that. And then in another way, there is this distinction between self and other. So too much othering creates objectification. We objectify the other. But it's also to realize, and I appreciate what the former Archbishop of Canterbury said. He said, you know, it's not maybe the best thing to say, I feel your suffering. It might be more skillful to say, I can never know how you're suffering in this way. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? I always thought the other was, but to understand that each person has a unique history, a unique experience. Their suffering is in the signature of their whole life. Their joy is in the signature of their whole life. And I can never really know it. Another teaching, and I'm sure many of you were here when His Holiness was here, that there are certain insights that we have about, for example, the truth of impermanence. Even as things were changing in Nepal from the 25th of April, and we thought just one quake, now we see aftershock after aftershock. The truth of impermanence prevailing. Or that all beings want happiness. The last part in this model, so we've had the affective and attentional dimension, we have the cognitive, which is related to intention and to insight, and the last is embodiment. And this I just want to say, don't take phys ed away from your kids. Or art class. I was in a little meeting with Tanya Singer, who's a neuroscientist from Germany. She's head of Max Planck at Leipzig. Also Mathieu Ricard and Joseph Goldstein and Mishi Jha, Richie Davidson. About a dozen of us sitting with the Dalai Lama, looking at the questions that were important for us to research, or for the neuroscientists, social psychologists to research in relation to compassion. It was really a fascinating meeting. Just was at the University of Michigan, and we were just in this, very nice room, very relaxed atmosphere. And Tanya Singer said something to me that really caught my attention. And she said, I think I've done some important work in the field of alexithymia, that is, kids who suffer from this autism-related disorder. And so we did some neural mapping. And what we discovered was that our capacity to actually sense into our visceral experience maps onto our capacity to sense into the experience of others. And I was like, oh. And I thought about how medical education, and now increasingly education in general, is designed to put people in a structure which disallows them to even go to the bathroom, if you will, when the sense of urgency is present. To sleep when the body is tired, and so on and so forth. And how that distancing from our somatic experience is actually affecting our capacity to sense into the experience of others. And we then, working with some of the people in the field, began to change our medical curriculum, our clinician training, realizing how important it is to be fundamentally embodied. And with our technology, which I love, you can just think about it, how our technology is wedding us to these machines, and how much more dissociation from our body is happening to all of us, and particularly to our kids. And how can we create the systems that return us and return our children to their bodies? Knowing that that kind of interoceptive capacity allows for empathy and compassion to be present. And that when we actualize compassion, which is really fascinating, it elevates not only us, but others. Others are really moved. I mean, when you see somebody, and I think a lot goes on here in Louisville, it becomes viral, contagious. Your father, Mayor Fisher, I've heard about him. Thank you. I heard he was a very compassionate man, not just in his mind, but he was engaged in helping others. We also know that compassion enhances immune response. We also know that it actually enhances longevity by enhancing immune response. There are many outcomes that are being mapped now by social psychologists and neuroscientists about the benefits of compassion. And we also know from Tanya Singer's work, my work, and Richie Davidson, that compassion and empathy are not the same thing. And it's been conflated by some more popular people in the field, but I want to make the distinction for you here. Again, just for the purpose of what you're developing in Louisville. Empathy is that capacity to be in emotional attunement with others. But if we experience too much arousal, if we're too upregulated, as I'm, for example, sitting with a person who's dying of cancer and is suffering from intractable pain, and I don't have that capacity of strong back, soft front, and to also distinguish self from other without othering the person. When that experience of empathy becomes too much, it moves into what's called empathic over-arousal and then empathic distress, and leads to selfish prosocial behaviors. For example, the doctor really is aroused but doesn't know it as he faces your catastrophic illness and lays on one treatment after another in order to feel like she or he can do something anyway. When empathy is regulated, it then moves into concern and into compassion, which basically has 4 elements. One is the capacity to attend to whatever is arising, the suffering that's happening. 2 is the deep intention to serve, this kind of ethical foundation. 3, very simply, is to desire to alleviate suffering. And the 4th is to engage either internally or in action in the alleviation of suffering to benefit others. And moving back into these 4 dimensions then, of attention and affect, intention and insight and embodiment, what happened for me was how do you take this heuristic map and create an application, a kind of pathway that can be taught to kids, parents, clinicians, educators, politicians, people in human rights work, people doing aid work in places like Nepal. How do you create a means for making that kind of content available? And I developed something called GRACE, which is easy to access, easy to learn, inclusive, and it goes like this. Doing this in vivo, while interacting with someone who's really suffering. Gathering your attention, letting it drop into the body, get really grounded, is the G. The R of GRACE is remember really why you're here, to recall your intention, to touch into your capacity for moral sensitivity and really why we're here, which is to create a saner, healthier world. The R, remember really why you're here. The A of GRACE is then attune at the physical level, at the heart level, at the mind level, to yourself, your own experience, to get grounded, to sense into your biases, and then attune to others, to touch into what their experience is. And the sea of grace is to consider what will serve. And this has to do with insight. It's the PDR, the physician's desk reference, but it's also some kind of deep alignment at the level of insight. What will really serve this person? What will serve in terms of other clinicians, the family members, the whole system? What will serve our kids? Take a breath. What will really serve? And then the E of grace, which is to engage. And then the second part of E is to end. How do we complete this moment with this child or this patient or this prisoner? To have at least an internal acknowledgement, if not an interpersonal acknowledgement, of what has transpired between us, be it very small or very great. Grace. Gather your attention. Recall your intention. Attune to yourself, then attune to others. Consider what will really serve. Engage and end. So I'd like to complete this talk with just saying in a plain voice the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattvas are those beings who have chosen, and I think this is a room full of them, to be in this life and to not just sort of scoot off only to the monastery, if you will, but just like Merton did, to take on the hard problems. Like, how do you create a city of compassion? How do you change how our kids are educated? How do we change how our medical professionals, nurses, doctors, chaplains are educated? I love staying at Christie's. Jim said to me, we don't do plastic water bottles here. That's one starfish. It's a world. We have to take responsibility at all levels of our life. I walk out of the bathroom turning off the light, not priming that pollution, global warming. Just one light, one starfish worth, one drop. So these vows are the kind of promises that I think that your city has made. But also, I also feel they're in the spirit of Father Lewis, of Thomas Merton. And the first vow is, creations are numberless. And this refers not only to every species on this earth, every being on this earth, but also to every thought that we have. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. And boy, that is so true. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. And I have to tell you, in the original Chinese, it was, I vow to put an end to them. But in working with the vows on translation, we say in Zen, and I think this is another thing that Merton really loved, we say, roll it all into your practice. I don't even like calling things a gift. I would rather refer to things as a given. My sickness is a given. My blindness was a given. Nepal is a given. The earthquake is a given. The conflict between the Buddhists and the Rohingyas in Burma is a given. How do we work with this? And we say, bodhisattvas do not seek easy situations. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. I'm going to work it. Reality is boundless is the third vow. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. And then this is quite faithful to the Chinese. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. I love to think of Louisville in the spirit of Merton and of your citizens being a city of compassion that is engaged in both social service and also social action. That, like in the spirit of Merton, taking a stand against injustice, against all of the things that were so powerful for him, that drove him in a certain way into a deep sense of urgency, including war, and including the waste that we make on this earth. At the end of every day of our practice, we do this chant. I'll just say it. Life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly, and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, awaken. Do not squander your life. So thank you, Owsley, Christy, all of you so much.
Thank you, Roshi, Joan, for the inspiration. I'm a business person that just happens to be mayor, and so I think I can say a lot of things that other elected officials can't say that don't have that background, because I've helped create jobs and been part of great organizations before, and for some reason that gives me some credibility when I talk about what some people perceive as soft issues in building a city, but in reality they're the most difficult issues in building a city. So I use a lot of frames that I've been trained to, and one is from a city perspective. A city, to be a good mayor, you have to have the head of a chief executive, the agility of an entrepreneur, and the heart of a social worker.
That's great.
Because because unlike a business where you can choose your employees and choose your customers, everybody is on my team. You know, the whole city team. And think of us as a bell curve. And when you get out on the far right and the far left of the bell curve, it gets very interesting, I gotta tell you. You know, but we love those people. We need to lift everyone up, and so we can't practice any exclusion. So how do we make decisions as a city, just like any of us do individually or in businesses? What are your key values that guide you as the lens for your decision making? So the key values of our city, and as I was getting ready to give my inaugural address, we said, what are those values going to be? I want to state those clearly so people know what they can expect of my administration. And the values were a city of lifelong learning, because when you see places that have got it going on, there's a lot of curiosity and searching and not certainty that people know all the answers, and that creates opportunity in entrepreneurship. The second is a city of health, physical health, mental health, environmental health, spiritual health. And the third one, which we kind of struggled to try to come up with this, was it kindness, was it hospitality? And Christy actually helped me come up with the word, was an even more compassionate city. So if you could close your eyes and say, I'm living in a city that's learning all the time, that's healthy in all aspects, and people are trying to lift each other up, Wouldn't that be a beautiful place to live? So those are our 3 values. So then the question becomes, because everybody agrees on the value of compassion, Republican, Democrat, no matter what skin color, where you come from, everybody nods their head. But then the difficult question, and Roshi Joan references, is how do you bring this alive? How do you make it practical from a community sense? So we can talk about some of the lower tactical issues that are very important. But what it connotes references back to Thomas Merton's epiphany in 1958 that I always got a kick out of, that he had this epiphany at 4th and Walnut Streets in Louisville. You know, but you got to have your epiphany somewhere, so why not in the middle of our downtown? But you know, one of the notions of his epiphany was interconnectedness and interdependence, and how people walk around thinking that they're not connected, but they really are. So how do you build a city fabric where it doesn't matter where you live in town, east, west, rich, poor, black, white, brown, you say, we are connected. We are interdependent upon each other. So it's those kind of 2 notions then that then translate into policy. It could be a compassionate schools project. It could be body cameras for police so citizens feel like there's more trust between policing and the population. It could be an affordable housing initiative that then pushes a community forward. In reality, the way we define compassion here is the respect for all of our citizens so that we want their human potential to thrive and to flourish, or as Thomas Merton would say, shine like the sun. And so when you look at it in that broad of a context, I hope that everything that we do, in effect, is driving compassion forward into the city.
Roshi Joan, it's incredible to hear how your contemplative beginnings led to an incredible array of actions, and you talked about them today, and they're also very practical, a lot of things you're talking about. So if you could tell our mayor things that have worked, that you have seen work in communities, in terms of the idea of not just saying compassion, which for some is a nice word, we all like compassion, it sounds good, right? But how do you really, how do you see that? How do you really get that down into a city?
Walking your talk. That's the easiest way to put it. You know, when the leadership of a community actualizes, lives the values that are at the heart of that community, he or she inspires others to take action within those frames. And you said a word that really, it was hitting my heart, you know, as you said it, respect. How do we engender respect within ourselves and also toward all beings, and in the way that Thomas Merton discovered that the deep truth of interdependence. Another thing, humility is another one. We talked in this training of clinicians about clinical humility, which goes back to not knowing. We don't know the answers. I really can't tell you anything.
Well, let me share a few stories here, because where we can be told is through others. And we just finished up our Give a Day annual week of service. That's the easiest way to express compassion in a community, right? When you look at it at kind of a tactical level, how can friends help friends? How can strangers help strangers? And oftentimes, when you set a noble goal, you don't know what's going to happen. You may not reach your intentional goal, but many good things happen along the way. So it was 3 weeks ago today that was the last day of the week of service. So I visited 8 spots in the community, and I was floating by the end of the day because of some of the things that I was taught by other people. First was 10-year-old Olivia, and Olivia decided that she wanted to help some of her classmates who didn't have enough food over the weekend. And so she started this campaign where she was going to have a food drive. And 10-year-old Olivia and her mom, and she recruited 2 kids from her class, and she lived in a low-income area of our city, ended up collecting 2 carloads full of food. She made a difference. And I said, Olivia, what's next? Just joking with her. She said, well, Mayor, I'm thinking about starting a conference for young women. and I said, what for? And I'll show Roshi Joan her picture here in a second. I said, what for? She goes, so I can teach young women how to have more self-confidence. I said, okay. So we went from there to Shawnee High School, and big Give a Day week of service. They were having their final session. It was organized by a gal named Gabby, 18-year-old gal who was homeless, had just become homeless, unfortunately, because her mother got involved with the criminal justice system in an unfortunate way. So Gabby was faced with some challenges. She needed to get a down payment for rent, $200. She needed to pay some school fees so she could graduate, $200, and she wanted to go to the prom. All very natural things. So a young man heard about this, and he has this foundation called You Before Me. So he approached us and said, is there something we can do? So as we kicked this off, we asked Gabby to come forward and thank her for organizing. So think about, during all this turmoil, she's organizing this event where there's 200 people at, putting others before herself. So we talked a little bit about that. And then this young man, through the Give a Day and with us, we said, and here's a $200 check toward your high school. Here's $200 for the rent. Here's a certificate for your hair, your nails. We opened up the lockers behind us, and there were 5 prom dresses in there. Okay. Talk about a waterworks. So when you talk about compassion being viral, then people say, what can I do next? And the last, which was I thought was one of the most creative, was, because you do work in prisons, was these people saying, would you come to the jail? We want to show you what we're doing. And so the jails in all of our communities around the country are the largest detox centers, unfortunately, that we have in the community. These folks, their Give a Day service was a 3-day class on helping folks in recovery get through that phase of their life. That was their gift to the community. So oftentimes all we have to do is say, let's try this together, and then teach that first year, but then get out of the way, to where then it becomes, hopefully in a community, it's like, Roshi Joan, what are you doing for Give a Day week of service? You know, what are you doing for Give a Day week of service? So I guess we do our best and follow other folks. Because I believe, like you, look, we are all born compassionate beings. Life just gets in the way, and people try to pull that out of you. So all we're doing in many things is just unlearning the garbage that's happened since we've come out of our mothers.
Yes. So I think it's one thing to introduce a curriculum in compassion for kids, but I would humbly recommend that you start with the teachers. And that also we take responsibility for creating the conditions where the kids go home to families that are compassionate. I mean, it's hard when the kids are there for 8 hours a day and they go home to conditions which are characterized by abuse. And it's, unless we look at, I feel that you probably are doing this, looking at this not just as we're training kids to be compassionate, but looking at it from a systems perspective. Kids are related to the teachers. If the teachers don't have it, the kids aren't going to get it. So it's looking at things from a systems perspective, saying, hey, we got to do the whole system. But I would really say start with the teachers.
Right. It's, all these things are very difficult. So the question is, how do you get started? I want to talk a little bit about what we're very excited about here in Louisville, and that is something called the Compassionate Schools Project that will have our pilot effort in 3 schools here coming up next semester, and then we'll be going into 25 schools after that, and then with the University of Virginia and their Curry School of Education. So we focus on K to 6. There are teachers with the program, so we're not overloading the existing teachers. Being a teacher is so hard, especially when you're in a large urban public school district like we have, 100,000 kids, 2/3 on free and reduced lunch, oftentimes some of them going home to very traumatic situations, and then we expect the principal and the teacher to fix all this. But we've got to keep chipping away. So part of this program is the teachers that come with it, and the teachers in the school then are exposed to it beforehand so they understand. It's hard to be an optimum teacher if you're not a compassionate teacher, and I would venture that most every teacher is. So the curriculum deals with first social and emotional well-being. Think about what we see on the streets of America right now in our most challenging times. It's people's inability to cope. So instead of working something out, you resort to violence of some kind or another. So that has to do a lot then with the neural training, especially when the kids are younger, of course, is when the brain's forming much more influentially than older. So it's the social and emotional well-being. It's nutrition is part of this as well. How do we take care of our bodies? Stretching and exercise is then the additional component of it as well, so that you can appreciate what your body can do. With phys ed being taken out of most schools, a lot of kids don't go down that path, which is leading to the obesity crisis that we have in our country between that and nutrition. And then the last is mindfulness aspect of the curriculum as well, to train kids how they can calm their minds so that they can be open to what's coming in. And for many of the kids, especially kids from distressed backgrounds, they have never had a calm mind before. So think about living where you've never been in the moment or in the present to be able to think what the possibilities are. So this is all part of the Compassionate Schools project. Sounds great, doesn't it? Now, we're not done. So I'm going to make a big plug for this. This might be the biggest audience we have. This is an $11 million project. We've raised about 20% of the money for it here in the last 3 to 4 months. Owsley Brown is the chair of the fundraising campaign behind this. So if you're interested in participating in an experiment on education that will be the first of its kind in the world, and folks, I would submit that we need to fundamentally try fundamentally different approaches, not just tweak what we're doing. This is a fundamentally different approach. So if you're interested in participating in it financially in particular, it would be a tremendous legacy
Doing a good job.
for you all when you look back on your life's work. So please consider that and contact me or Owsley Brown over here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I really, I'm going to talk to Tish and some of the Curry School people a little bit more about grace, because this is an incredible process for kids as well as teachers and family.
Great.
I'd love to open it up to the audience now.
My question to both of you is, there's a 4th chair on the stage. Father Lewis is sitting in there. What one piece of advice are each of you going to ask him if the rest of us weren't here?
Wow. You can start, Mayor. I mean, yesterday somebody asked him out on a date, and I thought that was pretty good.
That was good.
That was great.
Well, for me, it's easy, and that is referring to what I just talked about before, is how do we engage everyone in the community in a more meaningful way? And all of us come from a different place. All of us look a different way, So when we're having strife in our country right now, obviously, Ferguson, Baltimore, and when you see the people, that comes with automatic baggage in terms of how, they're a certain skin color, they're a certain age, they're a certain education group. One of the things that Father Lewis had as an advantage, and I have it as well, is that I'm a white male. So you can say things as a white male that other members of the majority population might be more receptive to, because they think they're more like you just because they look like you. Okay, so this is grappling with the perspectives of a majority population or a dominant population racially in a minority population. It is so extraordinarily difficult. You can't walk in anybody else's shoes. But I mean, the first step is recognizing that, right? So Father Lewis is a fellow white male, which are normally the root of many of these problems, by the way, males in general. You know, they don't necessarily have to be white, you know. How can we use him as that bridge, you know, for activism at the individual level to help in so many of these challenges we have?
You know, if Father Lewis, if he were alive today, he'd be 100 years old. Mm-hmm. And I would probably ask him, Father Lewis, what's really important to you now? Through the 100 years that you have lived, what is really important to you now? Yeah, I'd probably ask that question.
There are good numbers in the room that are so excited you're here because we all work with hospice. And I know you've done some terrific work with that in terms of mindfulness and compassion at the end of life. Just any inspiration you can give us, just love to hear some words on that.
Well, for me, the end-of-life care field is the richest, most humbling path that one can take. We'll all die. And to be able to presence a dying person on their journey through whatever they're going to go through, and to hold the family and also the clinicians with equal regard as you're in this mystery, and it is a mystery. We know that those of us who've been in the field, we know what a mystery it is to bear witness to the dying process. So I'd love to see the hands of those of you who are doing this work.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
Thank you for both your courage and also the respect and love that you offer your patients, your family members, and dying people who can be really tough to work with. It's not to make a romance out of the dying process. It is a deep and also not easy journey that many people experience that we're asked to accompany. And the image that I prefer to use is how we who have worked with the dying come alongside. There's the boat going toward death, and then our boat just comes alongside. Whether we're a volunteer or a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, our job is to come alongside. So thank you for that.